I'm really honored to introduce our speaker this evening, Miss Karen Lopez. Wow. She's been a member, and you're currently a member, right?
Yeah.
Of IRMAC, and also our parent organization, DAMA International, which is in the US. And she speaks all over the globe, a lot of times for DAMA, but other companies as well. She's a senior project manager and an architect. She specializes in data and data architecture and modern development methods. She's a chronic volunteer, so we're especially happy to have her volunteering for us to speak and share her knowledge with us because, as most of you know, IRMAC is a volunteer organization, so we're very pleased when a speaker volunteers their time and knowledge at these events. So thank you, Karen, for that. And just, there's an accolade of awards and titles that we could go on about with Ms. Lopez. But to highlight those, IBM had named her one of the top 3 influencers in data. She was also top 17 women in the Information Management magazine for information influencers. And also one of 50 global data knots with NASA. And the sky is definitely no limit for Ms. Lopez. I just want to sort of lead into her talk with sharing a couple of titles that she's written. Your master data is a graph. Are you ready? And enterprise data modeling, 7 mistakes you can't afford to make. I think that's a good opportunity for her to lead into this discussion. And thank you, and help me welcome Ms. Lopez this evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So the one famous thing for me you forgot to mention is I'm a former IRMAC president, which means I'm a past president, which is the best board position ever to have. Right. Do you agree? Everyone agree? Anyone else a past president? Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk about security and privacy. Now, 15 years ago, if I had pitched to talk about security, maybe privacy here would have worked. But especially in the U.S., anyone else here an American? I'm an American. I'm going to be also attacking Americans, but I am one. So only because the U.S. has no federal, unified, all-encompassing universal privacy legislation, which makes even the privacy discussion even more difficult in the U.S. So abstract, that's me. I stopped counting at 20 years. The NASA data knot thing that Wendy mentioned is kind of interesting. There's more than 50 of us. There's 50 each semester, and normally there's 2 semesters or intakes a year. Anyone in the US, as long as NASA can do business with them, it's a volunteer position. You learn about NASA open data and get to go to these 30-minute classes, online classes about the open data and about planetary sciences and rocket surgery and a whole bunch of other things, including math, astrophysical maths, which you can tell. But I'm a mentor in the program. Right now it's on a hiatus because they got a new director. Hi. But I encourage you when this class comes in, it's a really interesting thing. Like if you're like me and tired of designing for the 5,000th time the most beautiful invoice the world has ever seen, if you'd like to work with NASA Open Data and work with some amazing people from all over the world, it's a great thing to do in your spare time. It's all free. You get taught by NASA staff and other volunteers. So if you want to learn R or any data science stuff, Python, or some of the most fun images, NASA images. I worked on a project with them a couple years ago. We've heard of data visualization. NASA's experimenting with data sonification, which is turning data into sounds to see if humans can spot anomalies in the data better because it's a nuance in sound instead of a nuance on a computer screen. Right? So I found that really interesting. I don't know anyone else who's doing that sonification. I know about people who are using AI and machine learning to listen to manufacturing to see if it's still working, but
data sonification is happening at the Inclusive Design Lab at
nice.
OCAD University for disabled accessibility reasons.
That makes a lot of sense as well. Right. We were doing it just to see if, like, I couldn't hear differences, but I guess younger people can. You've all seen those videos can you still hear the sounds? I can't, no. Anyway, so that's a lot of fun. Oh, so the other thing I was going to mention, I'm a Microsoft MVP. That means that Microsoft gives me a whole bunch of software and Azure credits. So the examples I'm going to use in this talk are heavily Microsoft. That's not because I'm here to sell you on anything in Azure or Microsoft. It just means those are the tools that I have. So I'll be talking about features in SQL Server, and then you're going to tell me whether Oracle, DB2, MongoDB, Hadoop, or something has these features. Is that fair? Everyone remember that? So not selling you anything here. So why do we do this? I want us to talk about security and privacy because we love data. Everyone here loves data. I'm telling you, I'm not asking you. So, but I want to know, who are you? So, oh, the other thing I'm going to mention is I pulled these slides from my full day course on this. And that means I've got a lot of slides, but some towards the end we can skip. It was mentioned because we're live streaming to hold your questions to the end. That if any of you have heard me speak, you know that's not my favorite way of doing things. We'll be having some discussions. I will try to repeat your question or comment, but that means don't talk in paragraphs. Talk in witty sound bites so that I can remember long enough to remember what your point is. Is that fair? So how many people here primarily consider yourself a data modeler or data architect? So maybe a quarter of the room, third, okay. Primarily a other type of architect, enterprise, software, blah, blah, blah. What did I forget? Those. Project managers. I have pictures for you. So I steal that joke every time. How many of you are developers or DBAs? Yeah. Okay, some of you people raised your hand more than once. You noticed I said primarily. What have I left out? Oh, BI people. BI people, business intelligence people always want to be pointed out separately. I never understood that. You're still an architect, an analyst, or a developer. Anything else? Data scientist? Security analyst? Privacy analyst? Legislator? Because I want to talk to you. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Good. Oh, I forgot my usual. Who doesn't like raising their hand when the speaker asks you to raise your hand? Okay, good. So normally in my full day, you guys get a case study. But if you keep this in mind, is that the case study says you've been hired by a new company as a data modeler architect, because that's in the title. And you're also going to do logical and physical design. And the company that hired you, the only reason they wanted a data modeler architect is they've had a series of massive data breaches, and they couldn't answer the question, what data was lost? I know this never happens here, and it never happens to all y'all, but I've heard that it happens a lot to other companies. Do you agree? So how many, oh, the other thing is, if we tell a story or I ask you a question, it's not about you or your current company, especially if your manager's sitting next to you. It's about your neighbors, dog walkers, salon owners, developer who did it, okay? We all agree to that? So how many people have a neighbors, dog walkers, salons, developer who has had a data breach in the last 2 or 3 years that made the news? Notice I said that made the news. Okay, some of you were going to put your hands up until I said made the news. Okay, because that's another interesting thing is that, you know, here when there's a data breach, we're supposed to tell people. Sometimes in the US you have to tell people depending on what state you're in or what industry you're in. But there's a whole lot of organizations in the US that have no obligation to report that there's been a data breach. And that's why there's been this ongoing sort of, I don't know, debate about what's ethical disclosure about a security breach. So there is a major database, data-related magazine based out of the US that still has 2 years later their complete subscription customer information with mailing address, contact info, all the things that you fill out when you get a magazine. It's open and available on their website. I have reported it to them several times. I have not disclosed who they are. I've tried to use my internal network to get them to take it away. It hasn't worked, and I'm trying to decide now. I'm way past the ethical disclosure thing. Yeah?
I believe the similar thing happened with the Equifax breach with someone
Yes.
2 or 3 months beforehand
Yep.
pointed it out to them.
Yep.
Nothing happened, and then
This is really common. So at your neighbor's developers organization, do you know if there's a prominently available point of contact information for reporting breaches? Or do people just have to try to find some contact information for you? There should be. I think this is what the legislation will call for. And we're going to talk about some other things. Anyway, so keep in mind while we're talking about these things. Oh, the other thing I forgot. How long am I going until? 6? That's what I'm planning on. Good. They did say I had to head until 8, and it is a full day course. So normally I have labs in here, but I like sharing my space pictures. So this is one of my Barbies. She has a camera in her chest and an LCD monitor in her back, and she filmed the last launch of the Endeavour shuttle we're right next to the mission clock. So that was really exciting. 3 miles is the closest humans are allowed, so it was a lot of fun. So a lot of my courses have a space theme. Oh, how many people knew, because I was busy setting up, you know we have a Canadian in space right now, right? David Saint-Jacques? Do you know that you can go out and wave to him to the International Space Station at night, and you don't need anything special, just no clouds to see it? And you can go to spotthestation.nasa.gov, spotthestation.nasa.gov, to sign up for alerts. And you just get a little alert on your phone, and it'll tell you space station's going over in 15 minutes. And then you go out and you wave at the people. I do that all the time. Anyway, we've got a Canadian in space. I'll just keep saying that. We have a Canadian in space. There are 4 Canadian astronauts. Did you know that? Current active astronauts. Jeremy Hansen is scheduled to go in 2024 to the space station, which coincidentally is also the current end of life year for the space station. So it's kind of questionable. We don't know for sure if he'll go there. The other 2 astronauts that are in training, we don't even know what missions they're going to be on yet. So imagine you're dedicating your career to being an astronaut, and you don't even know exactly what your astronaut role is going to be. So interesting. So I talk mostly about transactional stuff. Doesn't mean that you guys can't talk about BI or data warehousing or something. It's just not what I do. Let's see. Oh yeah, I talked about the other company, and that the tools here are only for examples. So we're going to do an overview. We're going to talk about discovering data, categorizing it, protecting it, and monitoring it. So what happened on May 25th of some year? GDPR. Which year was it? Last year. Everyone's dog walkers organization is ready for GDPR? Do you know when I give this in Europe, not everybody laughs, even the people in Europe who are most impacted by it. But you all know that your dog walkers, developers organization is likely still having to be compliant with GDPR, even though you might be based here and think that you don't do any business in Europe. And that's because, like our privacy law, unlike our privacy law in Canada, it doesn't just apply to your operations in Canada or in the EU, it applies to European citizens. And if you collected data about a European citizen while you were during the course of business where you solicited that data, like, I don't know, sending out a newsletter to someone in Europe, GDPR still applies, for the most part. I'm not a lawyer, it's lots of gray areas, but it's unlike our privacy laws where it pretty much happens because operations happened here. Our privacy law protects everyone, not just citizens. I know because I'm not a Canadian citizen, but at least I'm a resident and it does protect me. So, how many people in your dog walkers, developers, data models keep track of the citizenship, all the citizenships of your customers, employees, and vendors? So sometimes I have people raise their hands because they work at a university, and it's very common to have collected citizenship for all kinds of reasons. Except that, then I say, is it all their citizenships, or do you just collect the one of them, right? So if your data models aren't keeping track of citizenship, how are you going to know when GDPR applies? Who knows what the penalties are for GDPR, a violation? The max penalty. What?
4% of your annual income or something like that?
Global gross revenue. not net, revenue
Per year,
per incident.
per incident. Yeah, per year, per incident.
Yes, yes. So far we've had a couple of these big breaches, a Facebook one, some big ones. Haven't been any penalties yet. I'm sure that those are making their way through whatever court-like system there is. But there's another penalty. Anyone know what the other penalty is?
Trust.
Oh yeah, trust, goodwill, losing thing. I'm talking about a real one though. Prison time. So you all ready to go to prison on behalf of your employer? You ready for it?
Do
But-
do they put like just the average Joe Schmo who?
What do you
has
think?
trick,
So the question is, yeah, do they put the average like worker, data modeler, data architect in?
or the person whose job it is to
Like,
make sure that it doesn't
or the CIO, CEO, CSO, CDO. That's going to be the big question, right? Now, here's the thing. When the U.S. Congress brought in Zuckerberg in to talk about, and then people at other breaches, Zuckerberg didn't do this, but another big breach, what was it? Was it a hardware vendor? That guy threw his people under the bus, said it wasn't his fault. It was other people. It was people way down on the list that caused the data breach. So what do you think your friends, your neighbors, friends, corporate lawyers are going to do when it comes time to figure out why there was a data breach? Do you think they're going to protect you or the CEO? Which one's going to impact the stock price more? Now, having said all this, I imagine that the prison time things, the criminal prosecution, is going to be reserved for the most egregious, on purpose, selling of data, like what happened with the big Facebook one. So the big Facebook one really wasn't a security breach of Facebook. It was a developer for a Facebook app who sold the data, like intentionally sold that data. So it was a data breach because it was in violation of terms, but it wasn't hacking, it wasn't an accident, it was on. So that's my guess for criminal charges. But what happens if there's a data breach and it also causes, billions and trillions of dollars to be drawn out of people's accounts? Someone will have to do something, right? I mean, that's the way it works. Sorry. It'll come back on in a second. There we go. So GDPR is one of the reasons why conferences are now selecting me to speak at their things, because everyone's worried about security. So I was going to ask you, are you guys really in tune to security yourself, or is it because it's become a greater topic at work, at your friend's company? Which is it? You just come for the free cheese because the cheese is really good here. No? What is it? Like, why this topic tonight?
It's a greater topic. It happens more often, and companies are starting to have more visibility on it.
Yeah, it's happening more often, and we're going to talk about that. And there's been more visibility and more public outrage.
Legislation changes as of November last year on
Yeah.
privacy breach reporting.
That's right. Legislation changes, like on privacy breach reporting. I think there's a lot of pressure coming in the U.S., which, I keep coming back to the U.S. because even though they're not leading the way, because they haven't had protection, something's going to happen. Because people are just, like, anyone know about the website, what is it? Have you owned? Oh, Pond/owned. Like, I'm getting one of those, like, every week now. I just got one today that said that, so it was for the previous one with that email verification IO, which again was an unprotected MySQL database, meaning one that was on the web with no password to the admin account. And it had been that way for years, and people had reported it. And so what they did was they turned their website off. But according to Troy Hunt, who runs that website, the database is still out there. Right?
Can they mask your email and send it to me like you're talking to me and I think it's you and I will not know the difference? Can they
Well,
do that?
I mean, that's how email works, right? So email was one of those, just like networking and messaging, was a technology that was going to change the world. So we built it assuming everyone's a good actor. So I could do this right now. I can use your email address to send an email to you. I can do that right now without ever having to hack your password or anything, and that's how a lot of phishing and malware and everything goes. So May 25th came around. Companies are starting to pay attention, but because we haven't had big fines or anyone going to jail, most organizations are doing this. We'll just wait and see. We'll just wait and see. But we're going to talk about why that's important. So here's Karen's position on governance for data security, data protection. I have said this my whole career, all 20 plus years, which is closer to 35 years. I want data protection to be as close as possible to the data. That, for me, means in the database. That's where I want it. My developers want it in their application. But that doesn't work well because then it has to be in all the applications, and it has to be in Excel where people run self-serve BI and Power BI, and it has to be in Tableau, and it has to be in all these other things. So that's an issue. Where are you going to find? There's one back there. It's okay. Hi. I think I'm biased because I was born a data modeler. I mean, I was born this way. I think our security requirements need to be in our data models. The requirements, I want the features that are going to implement them to be in our physical models. And where there's no database feature for it, I still want our data models, which are supposed to reflect everything we know about the data. It has to be there. So has anyone seen a data model that has security stuff in it? No. There's even a feature now in ER Studio where you can at least keep track of whether it's sensitive data or not. Irwin has a place for that, but most of the time I had to use attachments or UDPs in those modeling tools. Yep.
I believe you're saying that you want to track the regs and the tracks for that.
Well, higher than that. So in my logical model, I want to know this column is PII under Canadian privacy law. It's also PII under HIPAA. It's also health data. It's also personal identifiable information according to GDPR. Like that in the logical model, and then in the physical model, not just the access rights and all that other stuff, but we're going to talk about some of the features that I want to see in the database. I think that when we review a data model, that reviewing the security and privacy requirements should be like red letter, high priority. Like I'd rather get the length of the column wrong than get the sensitive and the data security wrong. So I think this requires us in our, and again, because this topic is data modeling, I know not everyone's doing data modeling. I know not all organizations do data modeling, but I have this observation. Well, I'll come to that in a slide in a second. I think we should measure how much sensitive data is in our databases and data models and report on that. That should be on our data management dashboards. Management needs to understand, like I came across this one, I was working on a data model for the travel industry and it hadn't even occurred to me. So I'm vegetarian, not a big deal, but I know on my special meal request on Air Canada, I choose a certain type of vegetarian meal. Did you know that in the US that can be HIPAA data? Because some special meals are medically sensitive things, so lactose-free or gluten-free or no nuts. It's treated the same as a wheelchair request or travels with oxygen or needs 3 seats or whatever it is, right? That's the type of data that typically gets missed. So people do know the standard, what's personally identifiable information, that your social insurance number should be protected. It's all those edge cases that we don't share with each other because the data management community, we don't blog, we don't tweet. Now I'm going off on another topic, but we don't share that information as part of our profession, and we don't do that well. So we need governance for this stuff. So I said I'm biased. I want all this stuff in my data model. So in this sample model from ER Studio, I believe, there's just these built-in things, privacy levels, or these are attachments, compliance mapping. You could do it at the entity or table level, and of course it's most important at the column level. But there are also privacy and security implications for combining data as well. So that would be harder to mark in a particular property of a column or a table. because we have all these data breaches. So, anyone hear any data breaches today? I mean, I know of a couple because I subscribe to a list. Any big ones? Anyone get notified? You guys have all signed up for that service to know when your data has been breached?
What are the lists, Karen?
So there's one from, is it ACM that I subscribe to? I think it's the Computer and Security, or Computer and Society SIG that keeps track of it. There's lots of lists for security breaches. Because you brought up the trust, right? You don't want your company name sitting up there, and you don't want the first line. One of the data breaches that I tweeted about today was one that had been reported, and it was a UK government, the Home Office. They had a data breach last week, and when they notified people, they disclosed all the email addresses in the notification, so it was a double data breach. So they had a data breach and a data breach in the notification. Let's just, yeah, see, you literally face-palmed, right? Yeah, you don't want to be that person, because we've all done that. So here's another thing to take to your bosses. I believe that data quality is also a data protection thing, because imagine if you were like me and I told my doctor that I was addicted to caffeine, which I legitimately am. Like, I have a coffee in the evening, right? He wrote down cocaine. And he was very concerned. And I'm like, did I say cocaine? Because, you know, I'm old. I could have said that. And he goes, no, you said coffee. And I'm like, yeah. But you've somehow recorded, now it's on my record somewhere, and I bet you it will never come off there, and it's probably being sent across borders and all kinds of things, right? So we'll talk about these things. Who knows what this says? I showed this the last time I spoke here. What does that say? Besides it's a UPS label. This actually says Lopez. L, amp, tilde, amp, sup, 3 pez. That's because I have a special character on the O of my name. And as this data gets sent through source to distribution center to shipper to UPS, it got escaped every time because of special characters. Now imagine you're trying to do name matching. How well are you going to match on this name? Right? If I say one of the GDPR things is not just data breaches, but is I have a right to be forgotten. Is someone going to find this record when I say I have a right to be forgotten and you guys don't forget me because my name got mangled this way? We don't do this here, right? We're used to special characters and names. You've never seen that happen. Who has a special character or a space, or you don't even consider it a special character in your name? Somewhere. Yeah? How do you spell it to a computer?
We do, because especially French has a lot of special characters and they have to be included. And I think in the Canadian space, because of the bilingualism, we are forced to include more of the special characters.
You know, that you'd think, a lot of the systems I've worked on here, you know, the DBAs and the developers are like, no, we're not using extended character sets. Why is that? It takes up space, and that would impact performance by how much? Nobody knows for sure. Just somebody has heard that using NSQL Server in varchar makes things perform slower, so we're not going to do it. And buffer overflows and
If you look at a database,
yep.
it's that right.
Yeah.
And we're still working on it.
Right. So we're telling people we won't call you by your name because our users get bored too fast. I mean, I like to make fun of this because I have not only special characters in my names, I have spaces in my names, all kinds of stuff, right? So this is what I'm going to talk about. So everyone knows return on investment, but here's what you're going to start using ROI in all your meetings. It also stands for risk of incarceration. So when someone brings up why we can't do the security and privacy thing, you're like, oh yeah, the ROI. But we have risk of incarceration. So who wants to go to jail? So when you want to win, I'll put that in quotes, when you want to succeed in something you want to do in your data models or design, you're going to talk about risk of incarceration. You're going to write it in your risk analysis for your cost, benefit, and risk on why you want to do some of these features. So discovery. So data cataloging is back to being a new buzzword. Who knows someone who, as an organization, that has a portal of data stuff or a data catalog or data library? Like 8 of you? What's that?
Open data.
Open data, yeah. So what I mean is the old enterprise repository or a portal, like, I don't know what everyone's calling it. The new word now is data catalog. So data catalog is where you're going to shove your data models, your reverse engineers of your databases, all the metadata about them, and all the sensitive, so that you can identify the sensitive data, right? Y'all have it? How are you going to know when some DBA drags 2 servers out from under someone's desk and the security guard holds the door open for him? That happened at one of my clients. How are you going to know what data was on that server? You're all just nodding. Like, I'm not getting any answers. You don't. Yeah.
To say the stuff that doesn't appear on the thing if you've cataloged it decently.
Well, so if you've cataloged it decently, part of cataloging is it's in this database, and that database runs in this software-defined environment, which happens to be on this rack. It's a drill down thing. Yeah, you had a comment?
The way to do that is there's a function called Intel AMT,
Uh-huh.
where you can access any device externally, like similar to what's called a DMC.
Okay.
So
It's a lot of buzzwords.
So there's a processor other than the CPU, which you can access via the network.
Yeah.
Power on, get access to the machine, then create hashes for all files on
Yep.
the machine. So you would have a list of hashes, so you'd be able to identify if there are any files at risk.
Yeah. Okay. So you talked for paragraphs, so I'm going to try to summarize that super. So basically, there are features available to us that can scan machines, both virtual and physical, to find out what files are located where. And is that going to tell me that that database has special mail requests located in it?
It will run the problems when you look at the table space file,
Yeah,
because that's where it is.
exactly.
So what you do is you can draw a byte, say 14 by 14 bases,
Yeah,
even though if you
yeah. So it's going to have issues with database files, right? And that's part of the problem. And then it's also not going to know, because if the data is encrypted as it should be, it's not going to be able, unless it also has the keys, to be able to search the encrypted data, right? So the other thing is, besides our databases, we have this data where? XML files, JSON files, data that's in transit, spreadsheets that users have created because they just don't like the application and they want to do all their data manipulation. The data scientists using files, putting it somewhere in the cloud because they've got their machine learning stuff up in the cloud, so they move the data up there. See, I look around, some of you are like me. You're close to retirement, right? So a lot of times when I ask people, why are you not worried about no one knows where the data is because people are saying, because I'm within 5 years of retirement. Anyway, there's lots of ways we do the scanning. There's full-on scans. There are specialized tools that will go search data. There's AI-based tools. IBM Watson is looking at tools. A lot of the tools that are in production ready and scale well right now, just look at the names of your tables and columns in your databases. So you guys all have beautiful, meaningful names for tables and columns, right? Mostly in German in SAP. But it all works well, right? No? This has been my experience, right? Because we can't have long table and column names. Why? Because the developers say it slows them down, even though we have self-service BI. But the real way to do it is to look at actual data. So if you saw a database table with a column that was called column 12, but it was 16 characters wide, and it started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, what might that data be? Credit card number. See? You don't know for sure, but I'd be looking at it, wouldn't you? Sorry. This means I've been talking too long when I let the slide go on. So there's syntax-based, which is looking at the names, matching it to letters. We're going to talk about one of those. Semantic-based, which looks at the names, looks at the words, and also knows that customer and client and SIN and SOC num are probably social insurance number. There's the AI-based, again, where people are looking at more like machine learning to try to look at data and look at designs to see what kind of data is contained there. And then I'm a big believer of we're not going to find all the sensitive data until we actually look at the data and the patterns of the data themselves. Syntax-based is a good start, but it assumes people don't put variety of data in the same column, and we all know that happens. And it's not going to help us as much with JSON and XML files and all the other NoSQL stuff. So the new words, the new buzzwords, data curation. We used to have data stewards. Now they're curators. It's not quite the same, but this is the new term. If you're looking for new articles about this, we have curators of the data. It's related to stewardship. It's an important part of this, and I see it a lot with GDPR discussions. Who is the person responsible for identifying this data, setting all the rules for it, and collecting what it can be used for? So just like in our privacy legislation, GDPR has a limit. You collect data for a use, and you can't use it for something else. Now, don't tell the data scientists that, because they just want to use the data for anything that they had thought of, and this is part of the ethics in data science, ethics in AI, ethics in ML. You're smiling like you're the first one to abuse that. Is that it?
I try not to.
You try not to. But here's the thing. Someone piped some database into a data lake. What was it collected for? Where are you going to find that data, that metadata? Somewhere in the cloud. No one wrote it down, right? We collected that data. Where is it documented? What was the official reason we told the person it was collected for?
It's in the marketing material.
Yeah, it's in some acceptable use policy that changed. What's that?
Terms and conditions.
Terms and conditions, but where do you find it as someone consuming that data?
You don't.
You do, I mean,
Generally, those terms and conditions are in such a way that you can use that for anything and everything.
well,
Nobody reads terms and conditions.
I know, I
It is
know.
so long,
I
and
know,
why
72
hurry,
pages on your
fix that,
phone.
and then move on, right?
Exactly, except some of them still have reasons. So the classic case that happened in Canada was those customs forms that you fill out when you come into Canada used to say this is used for statistical purposes only. And then someone at EI decided to go through them, and they ended up finding a woman who was on employment insurance who went to Florida. She said to interview for a job, but she was gone for about 3 weeks. And so they said she wasn't actively looking for work. She was on vacation. And it went, I believe, all the way to the Supreme Court. It definitely went to a privacy commissioner who said, no, we collected it for a purpose that said for statistical purposes only. This is not a statistical, this is an enforcement purpose. So now the cards say, we collect this data because we want to, pretty much. So every design decision comes down to cost, benefit, and risk. This is my mantra. It shows up in all my presentations. Yep.
Just one comment. You said collect for a purpose. What I found from a lean agile perspective
Yeah.
is that they take goal, question, metric, turn it upside down, and start with the collection, and then they work up the metrics, and then the questions, and then the goals. And the goals are left to the end. So that's how I've seen most projects run these days.
But when they're starting to collect the data.
Collectors.
Right. So that's fine. Except that my point is that metadata of what was the purpose, where do you find that when someone has dumped your like when you go to get data out of your customer database, where would you go find out what you're allowed to do with it? The answers are usually the legal department. They don't know for sure. They don't know if marketing bought a list to send a newsletter to, like, that has restrictions on it. So this is metadata that we should be collecting, the purpose for every piece of data and the allowed uses. Yeah.
In my business, we find that in the project plan, it would be, everything would be outlined where it's
During
gonna
the
be done.
project.
No, but it's archived together.
Oh,
So-
okay.
So you would always find it.
Oh,
You know,
cool.
It tells you exactly where they are and how how to find it, what you can do with it. all
That's
the
good.
Confidentiality agreement.
Are you like in the government or something?
I am a scientist, actually.
Oh, because that came from research standards. Yes. So research ethics, when you collect data about people, that's been around for decades and decades. So you're right, that's there. But your average credit card charge somewhere at the Bay?
That's crazy. I thought the whole world.
Some other buzzwords: CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I'm just collecting these buzzwords. So we need to catalog these assets. So one of the things you can play with, Azure Data Catalog, which is a software as a service thing available through Azure. Does anyone have Azure credits because you have some developer thing or something? Yeah, like I have a lot as a partner and from my MSDN subscription and everything. There's also a whole, you can go get $200 of credits to use for free for 30 days for almost anything, Azure Data Catalog. But Azure Data Catalog also has a free version. We'll talk about what that means. But even the paid version is $1 per user per month. $1 per user per month, so $12 a year per user. And basically what it allows you to do, you don't need to see the details in this, but it allows you to reverse engineer a bunch of databases and a bunch of files and some things and put it into a portal. So it uses this little browser-based app where you have to have credentials to the catalogs or to the database in order to reverse engineer. And it runs, and some of the things it currently supports now, all the SQL Server, SQL Data Warehouse, SQL DB, Hadoop, DB2, Teradata, MySQL, HANA, Salesforce, a whole bunch of stuff, and that's changing. So you can point it to there, and then it will bring back, if you've ever seen a portal or a data catalog or a repository, like the name of a table. This comes from the AdventureWorks database, which is the sample database from SQL Server. Comes with a table and the columns and the descriptions if they're in the database. It allows you to assign an expert to them, to tag it with information, to, and if you want to, now this is the crazy part, when you reverse engineer, you can say, yes, bring me the first 1,000 rows from that table. Now, that's really wonderful. I've always wanted in my data modeling tool to be able to double click on a table and see sample data. The problem is, it's going to store that in Azure. It may be a data breach if you reverse engineer and provide it to a third party and you don't have a third party agreement with Microsoft Azure, right? But if you're going against a sample database, that's not PII because it's not about real people. So basically, what it allows you to do is write your own notes about it. It allows you to tag it with, is this PII, is this other stuff? So I encourage people to go play with it, if only because it's free. Now the limits are, the free version allows you to catalog 5,000 objects. And an object is basically a column, a stored procedure, a user-defined function. It's not much, right? 5,000. But that's the free part. Even the $1 per user part only allows you to collect right now today 100,000 objects, which still isn't a lot. But the reason I bring this up is if I were documenting this and I didn't have a data modeling tool and I wanted to reverse engineer a database and share it with my team, even at 100,000 objects, that would, a lot of my development project, a lot of that would fit in there. And you can choose what types of objects you want to reverse engineer. If you wanted to do something quick, you could do that. So I encourage you could just go to azuredatacatalog.com and you can sign it up. Now there's one other great caveat for this. A domain can only have one catalog. So my domain's datamodel.com. There's only one Azure Data Catalog. If you're the first person to go in and catalog something under your domain, you are now the owner of that company's Azure Data Catalog. The other thing is, if you try to go do it and someone's already done that before, you can't go do it. You have to go find that person and say, go reverse engineer this database. The reason I give all these catalogs is I consider this minimum viable product. Right? It's the first version of it. There's some updates coming in the future. And let's see, what can I share? I can't really share anything about that. But what I like about it is it allows people to share in a very affordable way. So like if you wanted to implement the ER Studio or the Irwin portal, how much does that cost? Anyone know? Anyone price that out lately?
5,000 per license or something.
Yeah, so like 5,000 per seat. But you can buy an enterprise license, but I believe, or you could use something like Informatica or one of those tools or Tibco. Now we're talking like mid six figures. We're talking $12 a year per user. So I see this right now as a project team-based tool that you could use that's kind of nifty to play with. But the yep.
For this one, probably you need to give the full access to the database so that it can pull all.
Whatever that is. So in DB2, it's rights to the catalog. It's not full. It's the same access for reverse engineering a data model, right? In some databases, depending on how the catalog works, you can do that without having access to the data even, right? So it all just depends on the database architecture. So this is the most important part, though, that I think about this discussion, is characterizing our data. So right now, where do you think your friend's organization keeps track of where all the sensitive data is? Where's it physically located? Your friend's company. So you can talk freely. You can make stuff up even. So where is it? It's in people's heads. That's agile. That's very agile. You just go ask the guy who designed it, right?
If you're still there.
If he's still there. This is what my thing about the agile approach to you just go ask the guy is that often that guy has moved on or retired, or it was actually 30 guys across all these projects. And so every IT shop has that old guy or gal that's like this me/IT person that's been around forever, that really wants to retire but can't because they like being the person who knows everything. You guys are all picturing one specific person in your organization, right? I like working with that guy because it's often faster than talking to the actual SME. But then you need him to come to work every day, all day. And he never gets to go on vacation, so he's grumpy, right? But where else? Where is almost all company data kept? Excel. So the number one place that I see this list of sensitive data is in somebody's Excel spreadsheet that's usually just on a shared drive somewhere that's not protected. Gets emailed around. There's 30 versions of it. Do you feel that this is a good data management professional tactic? Who do you think's responsible in your what role is responsible for knowing where all of our sensitive data is? Governance, CDO. What if there's no CDO? CIO. Do you think the CIO knows?
No. I think someone in IT.
Someone in IT. The developers? Maybe.
A class of person there, like the security person or...
Oh, like the security group. I find that just like DBAs, the security group people are used to thinking in terms of files, not columns, right? So it's interesting that most operational DBAs that I work with, some developer DBAs know this, they never go inside a database unless they're diagnosing a problem. They don't know anything about what's inside the database or inside a table. They wouldn't know where email address is located. They'd first go to the customer table, and the customer table is basically an ID and a pointer to something else. And then they realize it takes 27 joins to get to the email address, and the email address is in a table called Mark Conk type, right? You know this, right? It's not, and it might not even be called email address. It might be called ADDY, like ADDY, I saw it one time. So I would think data management professionals in the organization are the role that's responsible, and I think there's no one person that's responsible. And when I say knows where the data is, I don't mean strategically, I mean operationally. So when the data scientist says, I need to come and get all the contact information and how it's changed over the last 5 years for this type of customer. Who's the person that's going to tell them where to find that? You're just nodding again. Okay. So some of the places I've seen, Informatica seems to be really common because it's used for data lineage and movement, and someone wrote something down because they had to. Watson has developed a way to do this classification in sensitive. There's a new tool. It's actually an old tool that Irwin.com bought called Irwin Data Governance, which also is much like Azure Data Catalog, but also involves data models. So you can keep track of the metadata, all the data and the metadata about it, and classify it. It will help classify the data. And then whatever your data modeling tool, Portal, and then spreadsheets probably, right? So there's no demo, but who should do this? So I think some of the end users, you have those key end users who kind of know the systems a little bit, and they've been around forever, and nobody wants them to retire because the people replacing them won't know anything. There's a lot of self-serve BI, and super users know where the data is because they're writing their own queries and they're doing it across systems. I think data architects, maybe we don't know it in our head, but we should be able to search through our data models and find out where the best place to get email addresses over time, or to tell people we just blew away their email address. We didn't keep old copies. So here's an example. This is from, let me see, where's this from? I think SQL Server Management Studio has a new feature that will allow you to point to any database it can connect to, so primarily SQL Server, but anything it can connect to. And it will go, based on the names of the columns, guess what type of data it is and what the sensitivity level is. And you can extend those. And it's, so my co-presenter, who I normally present this with, made up these Spanish terms. I did not make them up. Tarjeta Crédito ID. To see what it would do. A lot of the issues with data classification is, does it only work in English? Because sometimes we get data that's in other languages, or have an application like SAP, where the table and column names I think are still in, and the code's still in German. So Microsoft is starting to expand. I think they told us that they're working on their 12th language for looking at the names of table and columns and identifying sensitive data. There's also other tools that will go through and try to find confidential information. So in this case, we have address lines, national ID numbers, trying to figure out where our financial data is and what the sensitivity level is. So our database tools are starting to get these features, and I bet you your DBAs, your typical operational DBA who doesn't really care where the data is or what's in the database, isn't using these. But maybe we should be motivating our DBAs to be pointing this at databases, because this will get you 80% of the way there, and the last 20% will still take you 80% of the time to find. But if we could just run these free tools that are embedded in our database tools, we'd be that better off, or worse off, depending on your point of view, like if you're going to jail. So, typical statistic that's thrown around, that data scientists spend 80% of their time sourcing, prepping, and cleansing data. If you think about it, that's 4 days a week. And then I saw another stat that said, then they spend 90% of that last day just training their models, and 10% of Friday afternoon, if you're doing the math. What's 10% of Friday afternoon? Distractions usually, but 10% of Friday afternoon actually doing data science. Does that sound about right? No. We are lousy at documenting our data. Does this come as a surprise to anyone? Have I just depressed the crap out of you? You've all gotten quiet. The reason I bring this all up is with GDPR, with these facts, with all these new tools, with enforcement and data breaches, we should be bombarding management for requests for new budgets, to get these tools, to go back to documenting with data models, to go back to taking inventories and building catalogs and classifying the data. And especially if you remember ROI, you tell the boss, ROI is important again, risk of incarceration, because they should be throwing money at us for data projects. Has that been your experience? Did you remember to go talk to the CIO, the CDO, and the CEO about keeping their butt out of jail?
I'm trying to do that at a luncheon in June. Actually, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I think that this is important. If we, like a lot of the data management people, a lot of the DAMA members across the world, like we're just tired of asking for more, right? We stopped asking for more. We just make do. But I think we could really, handle this. We could really be asking for more because of all this pending legislation. So in addition to GDPR, California is coming out with their new privacy legislation that's highly modeled off of it. So, and Canada's working on making our privacy legislation much more like GDPR. This is the time to be inventorying your data, because I used to get those phone calls starting in the 1st of May. I was getting these phone calls. We want to be GDPR compliant. Can you help us? I'm like, first, I can't, because there's no such thing as GDPR compliant. There's no compliancy test. It doesn't work that way. It's just legislation that focuses on processes. Second, do you have a complete inventory of all your data, where it's located, what it means, and data models? No. Okay, you're going to spend the next 6 months doing just that. But we have to be ready by May 25th. And I'm like, that's why I said I can't help you with that. And anyone who says they can make you compliant by May 25th either doesn't understand GDPR or is just going to give you a compliance certificate that's meaningless. And it all makes me sad. So once we find all that data, because you magically did it, and because you had funding and 25 people to help you do it, then there's all kinds of other automated things that we should be doing that I'm not finding that organizations are doing. And one is, at your friend's organization, do you know if there's active auditing and monitoring for things like SQL injection and discovering and data leaking out? There is? You're nodding. You're nodding this way.
No, I'm saying.
No, you're going yes. He's going no.
Well, I can tell you because of regulatory compliance.
Yeah?
I got 3 lines of defense. They're all working together, making sure that there is this auditing, scanning on databases.
Yeah?
And then the next level of responsibility will be the actual compliant
Yeah?
function pieces that they are looking at without the gaps.
Yeah?
And then the auditing people and operational risk people are actually putting magnify on what the data is all about, where.
And is that because you're in a highly regulated industry?
Well, it's we're trying to be more disciplined.
So you're trying to
in that
be
environment. Yes.
really good at it?
Yes.
Yeah?
Because we're dealing with data from different countries, like 54, 58 countries.
Oh, okay.
So we need to understand exactly how
Yep.
a regulation or a regulatory
Mhm.
compliance obligation
Yep.
is met by different countries.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same regulatory compliance obligation, but
Yep.
different economies,
Mhm.
different scenarios, how to apply.
Mhm.
Not just the regulation, but also the monitoring and control processes.
Right.
So
So,
we can come to an agreement, how we're gonna do this in this region, in this
Mhm.
country.
mhm.
So there is some discussions around it.
Okay, so if I quickly summarize that, you believe that you have very good or best practices for defense against security threats because your organization is concerned about compliance because you collect data from lots and lots of countries and you have lots of regulations to be compliant with.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah,
I hope everyone heard that.
because we believe that we are on the right track.
That's good. So I'm encouraged to hear that. Is everyone else encouraged because your organization is doing the same things? Who's responsible for threat detection in your organization, do you think?
Information security.
Information security, security, what?
Cybersecurity.
Cybersecurity. Oh yeah, cyber's the new buzzword. Cyber became a noun. I don't know when that happened, but I'm going to be one of those crotchety people that says cyber is an adjective and not a noun. But the cyber has become a new buzzword. Anyway, yeah, did you have something to say?
With respect to, you mentioned the ROI,
Yeah.
To reduce risk.
Yeah.
That's-
So your question is, you could create a shell company to mitigate risk against the real company in order to protect the real company. What's to stop them from doing that? The same thing that stops them from doing that for Sarbox, for HIPAA, in other words, yes, that happens, and it happens a lot, and maybe that's why personal responsibility through criminal stuff, right? Because we can't send companies to prison. We can only send people to prison. But I'd say the same thing that stops every other stack of companies. We all know that big companies do this, holding companies of holding companies and everything. So you're right. There's always, every time you put in a regulation, there are people who are design a way to make that regulation less applicable to them. I get it. So thoughtful discussions about this. So I started that discussion. So now I've depressed you all because your friend's company isn't doing all this. But when was the last time that you guys took pending legislation and brought it forth as a reason to do what I call basically a data infrastructure project? So we did it in the 80s and 90s with case tools and information engineering, and we had information strategic plans, and we had business area analyses. We did all that analysis stuff up front, and then we just got beat over the head because it took too long and cost too much money. But I think security and privacy and compliance are going to be a really good time to start asking for what I call data infrastructure projects, programs, and money. And I think we started it, so the last time we had this, probably in Canada, was when our privacy legislation went in, because we had the same thing. We had to inventory the data, we had to know our processes. New legislation's going to come. But now the new legislation is coming to things that it didn't really apply to before. So we'll be getting it for financial stuff, we'll be getting it for, we already have it for health stuff. But I think the advent of the pressures that are happening in the US are going to ripple through everybody else, even though we have good protections, generally better protections than Americans have. I think because of the backlash that's going to happen there is that there'll be more pressure on us here because that'll make the news. And it'll make the news in Europe if someone starts going to jail or Facebook gets fined 4% of their global revenue. Right? So here's one of the features in SQL Server. It's called dynamic data masking. So who masks data? So masking data is like replacing all but the last 4 digits of a credit card number. Everyone remember when the full credit card number, the expiry date, used to print at the bottom of every receipt? Do you remember that? I remember buying a Canadian Tire gift card, except we didn't have cards then, a gift certificate to give away, I think, at an IRMAC lunch. And it was a gift certificate printed on a receipt with my credit card number and expiration date, like literally something designed to be given away, and it had my data on it. I remember how crazy that was. So this is an industry standard, right, for credit card numbers. Where does that get implemented in your system, your friends' systems? What masks the data? Do you know? The printing routine? Would you guess? The receipt printing routine?
I guess when it actually prints it, when
Yeah.
it sends the command receipt.
Yeah.
I would guess that's when they do data transfer.
Yeah, so if I point Excel to it and I bring back the credit card number for that transaction, I'll have to know to mask it, right?
I think now for Hadoop or some of the other ones, they actually are implementing at the column level some masking where if they try to retrieve the information and it's the, I guess the feature is not disabled or something, then they just get masked.
Yeah, so that's what this does in SQL Server. It started in SQL Server, I think 2016, it might have been 2012 or 2014. Dynamic data masking. So in SQL Server, dynamic data masking, the reason it's got the word dynamic is it's applied just before the data is presented to the end user. The data in the column is still unmasked in this feature. And the reason is if you mask the data, then you can't match it, right? I can't say, go get me, you know, this credit card number because it's masked. So I can still write a query, but when it comes back to end user, and because it's in SQL Server, remember that governance principle where I said it's enforced as close as possible to the data? Means two things. I, as the data modeler, not a developer who decides every other character should be masked, or all but the first 4 should be masked, or every character should just be incremented by 1, which is what one developer did with my credit card numbers in one of my point of sale systems. I'm like, no, you will do all but the last 4. Yes, but if we do this, it's encrypted. Okay, incrementing by 1 is not an encryption. And by the way, there's a check digit that won't work with. So, dynamic data masking encrypts it. And the reason I love this as a data modeler is I define it in my data model. It gets generated in the DDL. And anything you point at that database will bring back masked data. Right? And because it happens just before it's brought back, it doesn't impact performance because the engine's just doing its normal stuff, and then just before the results come back, this mask gets applied. That's why I love it. So for instance, all last 4, there's some standard data masking. If I say it's an email, it does the first letter, a bunch of X's, an @sign, the first letter of the domain, a bunch of X's, and then in SQL Server, if it's an email type, they all get set to .com, whether it's a .net or a .org or .ca. You can have these default masks. So if it says if it's numeric, it makes everything 9s. If it's characters, it makes everything X's. Then there are custom ones you can do. So for instance, I can't do June 99, 99999 in SQL Server in a date column because it enforces that it has to be a valid date. But I can put a mask on it to do that at the time it's brought back. So coming in SQL Server 2019, which is in preview right now, is the concept of static data masking. And it's the same concepts, except it masks data as you make a copy of the database. Can anyone think of why we might want to do that? Testing and development. So there's a slide later where I'm going to say I'm on this big kick to say we should stop using production data for dev and test. It's never going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm starting the discussion. So this is there's software you can buy that can mask and obscure data. The problem I have with this is to effectively do a mask, you basically have to make the data unusable so that it looks like that, like the KII, like that's interesting, but I could just do a random email address at that point, right? So I'm not sure how masking is going to protect people's privacy. I know that I own the email address Karen@rogers.com. Look, I just shared some PII with you. Karen@rogers.com. Lots of people give Karen@rogers.com either as a fake email address or because they think it's their email address. And I get all kinds of things. Patient files, legal files, divorce files. At one point, the customer service address for Creemore Brewery was forwarded to Karen@rogers.com. I got all their requests for sponsorship, plus all their complaints of broken glass, bugs, and rodent parts in beer. And they wouldn't fix it, so I started responding to them. That got it fixed. And I got a free fleece from Creemore. So the way it works in the SQL Server thing, and sorry, it's SQL. But the way it works is I do my normal create table thing, and then I just say for phone number, masked with default. So in my data model, a phone number is a varchar, could be a char, it's not a number. The default for that would make it X's, right? Email, it's got the function email. So it would do zxx@cxxxxx.com. So what I love about this, it allows me, the data person, the person who loves the data, to define a mask that then will get used for that data everywhere. So I work with the business person to figure out what's the safest mask. We put it in the data model, and then every time customer first name is used, it's going to get that mask. Don't you think that's neat? Make you feel powerful? Because one of the problems that happens is someone will find out this column needs to be masked, but on this report it's masked that way, on that report it's masked another way, right? So I have more work to do, which means I can go ask for more money. So the important thing for this feature, of any masking feature, is most developers want to do it in their code, but that means it's only masked in that one set of code. It means there isn't a central mask for it. It means that you get a variety of them and often the wrong one, because typically developers, I hate to tell you this, don't love their data as much as a data management professional does. And therefore, they just arbitrarily make up something and say that's good enough until someone complains. I'm going to skip over that. That's just more examples, more examples. So there's some other things. You can't mask an encrypted column. So there's all these blockers to these new features, mostly because they're new or because it makes no sense. So if it's encrypted, I can't mask. But that means that it's encrypted at least, so it's encrypted at rest, whereas in dynamic data masking, it's not. Can't do it on a computed column, but if a computed column used masked data, it computes on the masked version, not the underlying version. There are a million ways to get around the masking. So one of the things is if you want to give your DBAs and your support people the rights to see unmasked data, they can. So it's not for everyone, it's for most people. But it's not a security feature. I just want to keep saying that. It's not a security feature. I consider it a privacy feature for when someone leaves a report on the bus, or for all those nice banking machine terminals that are facing the outside window downtown here. I love looking at those. But I love it because it allows a standardized mask. It works on anything that queries the data. And people don't whine to me as, don't worry, we'll do that later. We'll do the masking later. I know of a system that was supposed to have masking 20 years ago that still doesn't have the masking applied to it. But someone wrote it in the requirements, so they got through their auditing because it was in the requirements. No one went to measure to see if that's how it was built. Another typical thing, row-level security. Row-level security, typical example. You have a doctor, they're in the emergency room, they can only see patients that they're treating. How's this normally done today? Views is the number one way of doing it. But this is more dynamic than that, right? This isn't, this salesperson can only see something in their region. This is more of which patient have I been assigned to 30 seconds ago. So views are the number one way to do it. The other way is applications. There's just a many-to-many table. Well, under the covers, that's what's happening now. But in SQL Server, they have this feature, row-level security. You basically say this doctor gets to see things with this predicate, this thing in the query, and it enforces it. And there are some ways to get around it, but this, again, allows me to put that specification in the data. Yep.
So would something like, sorry again, to
No.
would something like this be like the doctor's ID key would be
Yep.
appended to each of these rows, and it'd just be like a join where their ID with whoever they're relevant?
I would say virtually that's what's happening, but it's very dynamic, right? But yeah, that's what's happening under the covers. But you get to say basically only allow, so unlike if someone did this in application code, the doctor doesn't know, if he's assigned no patients, he doesn't say you can't see other patients. He just gets a null result. Like there's no patients in the ER, even if you're looking around and you see a lot of them. So the reason I love it is it's used to block, it can be used to block write access as well. So it's not just a read thing. This person can only update rows that they're allowed to see. So in the past, I'm telling you, we did this with views and we did it with very cumbersome application code that was full of holes. Now we can do it at the database level with data, and that makes it more robust because they've thought about a lot of the things. Now you can divulge some stuff. So for instance, you can use a divide by zero trick for a lot of these things. So if you get that, if there's an actual row and it results in a divide by zero error, you'll get the divide by zero error instead of null. So there's some issues there. The other good thing about this, it works even if you're an owner of the database. So your DBAs and devs and all that other stuff too. Why do I love it? Because I don't have to rely on an application coder to understand all the tricks for this, and I can define it with data. It's data-driven access. That's what I like about it. There's another feature called Always Encrypted, and basically what you need to know about it is that the target breach was a man-in-the-middle attack. The target data breach, which went on for years, and people were notified and they ignored the notifications for a long time, was done in the memory as the data went from the credit card reader to the point of sale terminal, and it was unencrypted on the way between the credit card reader and the point of sale. With Always Encrypted, the way we used to build encryption is there was encryption here, you unencrypted it, you wrote it with a new key, and then when you send it to the back office, you unencrypted it and sent it and wrote it. All that encrypting and decrypting meant that the data was exposed. With Always Encrypted in SQL Server, there's a key that goes on the server, there's a key that goes to the column. You have to have both keys, and it's literally encrypted at rest. It's encrypted over the network. It's encrypted all the way to the client, and then at the client, which has a key, it gets decrypted. And this stops the notorious man-in-the-middle attack because it's always encrypted. The one caveat for this is it has to be a .NET application in order for this to work right now. Notice I said right now. So it's enabled at the column level. It protects the data at rest and memory. And there's the key management issue because, of course, if you lose your keys, you can't get it unencrypted. Whoops, let me go forward. And it basically, you create keys, and then you have these encryption types. There's two types of encryption right now, deterministic and random, which is deterministic means the same value gets encrypted to the same value using the same keys. Random means the same value would get encrypted to different values, even if it was two Karens. They'd get different values. And there's a trade-off for doing each of those. So I like this. SQL Server, there's a wizard for it, and it will tell you if there are any blockers, because there are blockers for it, like if you have dynamic data masking, because I said you can't do it on encrypted columns. Why do I love this? It's always encrypted. Oh, the other great thing about it is that you can turn this on, and you don't have to change your application at all. You don't have to change the database. One thing changes, the collation, if you care about that level of detail, gets changed for that column. It's done at the column level. But you can have always encrypted, and your application doesn't have to know it all, as long as it's a .NET application. So, got just a few more minutes. I talked about some security things. But every security presentation has to have a comic. And basically, it usually has this one that says we can put all the security stuff in, but then there's always Dave. So a lot of data breaches. What's the number one data breach cause today? It's been that for decades. What is it? Yeah?
Phishing or humans just...
Number one is SQL injection.
Okay.
Number one has been for decades. Easily testable, easily discoverable, easily prevented, number one data breach hacking cause. The second one right now is unsecured databases and what I call S3 buckets in Amazon. So basically this has happened to me on a project. Guy in QA wanted to send the database offshore, and the database had totally unencrypted, unobscured production data because that's what we used. Wanted to send it offshore so that the guy could see what was causing the problem. Now, they had monitoring systems that wouldn't let data that looked like credit card data and financial data, so it stopped him. So what he did was put it on a thumb drive, took it home, and emailed it from his Hotmail account to the offshore team. Then it got too big for Hotmail, so he came to me and asked me as the project manager, how do I send this offshore? And I'm like, first, we don't send this anywhere. And second, how have you been doing it? So he told me this. Now, he was just a guy trying to get a job done. They wanted the bug fixed. Well, the way he was supposed to do it was to make test data that would replicate the problem and send the test data. That's how he was supposed to do it, but he never did, because that took work, and we all know people don't like doing work. These days, instead of hot mailing it, he would have put it in Dropbox or an S3 bucket or OneDrive or some secure file transfer thing, right? There would be no protection on it or anything. This is where a lot of the data breaches, and I predict that that's going to overcome SQL injection, and probably has already. We just haven't found all the open Dropbox and everything. So, SQL injection, I talked about that. Then there's the incremental thing. This happened to this poor kid in Nova Scotia, young person. You ever see that customer ID equals 12345, and then you change it to a 6 and you see another customer? By the way, that's considered hacking in the US under the US Patriot Act, and this guy actually got arrested under similar charges here, under anti-terrorism. This is a scary thing, because what he did was he found out that the Freedom of Information Request system in Nova Scotia used one of these incremental things and had no protection. It just assumed no one would get curious and go change the number to see what it would do. This is a common design pattern that should be just driven out. There should be no way to go get another customer's record. It's a lazy way of trying to do security. Oh, and by the way, the reason he really got in trouble is he started incrementing the number, and he was getting files returned, not rows. So he got files returned, so he got every Freedom of Information request requires you to put a credit card number in case they have to charge you for it. So he got PII plus credit card number that was being stored in documents. Yeah.
From what I heard, you just made a program.
Yeah, he's like me. I say the best data modeler is a lazy data modeler. Instead of increment it, he just wrote a program to do that and got every file off the server.
So he wouldn't even know what he got. He just knew got a ton of stuff on his website.
Right. And that was what they used as proof that he was actually a bad actor. Because he was lazy. They could have got him just for doing it manually, but because he used an automation, that made it worse. So, trusting good people is the other reason we have data breaches. People don't always stay good people. People mess up. We should be monitoring for this and checking, and we should have automatic alerting for it. So my rant topic is we need to stop using production data in our dev and test environments. There are a couple of exceptions, which are if you're testing a migration, at the last point, yes, do a test migration. That I get. But this backing up a database and giving it to developers, like even when we had a development environment that was on a server and I could protect it, now we don't have that. The developer environment's on developers' laptops usually. And they take it home and they put it on other unsecured machines. And even if we encrypt the data, first thing a developer wants to do is turn off all the protections, turn off all the RI to make the development go faster, right? We need to stop doing that. So this is the section that I said I'd skip over, but I'll have it in the slides that I can give you, is that what should you be learning in order to do better data protection? I think big data and analytics. So even if your data isn't big data, the analytics side of big data helps you understand your data. The new protection things are going to use AI and machine learning. We data people should be literate in AI and machine learning. And this is where those Azure credits or AWS credits come in handy. There's lots of free courses. There's lots of free servers. Microsoft has something that I got a blog about. It's like 25 services that are always free for a year. You just get these little tiny machines, and some of them are AI and ML. Plus you can go determine whether it's a puppy or a blueberry muffin. Everyone seen that one? When was the last time you took a course or studied about data quality? Or read a book, heaven forbid?
Last session.
Yeah.
Last month, but
Yeah.
we're on it.
So remember, this is the thing that I think everyone in the security, privacy, and data modeling side has skipped, that I believe data quality is a massive data protection issue, and nobody's really talking about it. Use these cloud services. You can hire help. We should automate some of your tasks. Be a lazy data management person and automate some of your tasks so you have more free time. Because as data model, this is data model, she's here. She has her own Twitter account, it's data_model, and she's actually gets paid to attend events at times, along with my astronaut Barbies that gets invited to space agencies around the world. It's the craziest thing. And no, I'm not a Barbie collector because my Barbies are not in a box. It's just a good, when you have props, you get invited to do things. And that's one of the main reasons. But I like to make photos with her. So she says it's all about the data. I find that almost every course I've looked at for security and privacy talks all around the servers, the databases, the files, and never gets into inside the data, which is why I'm talking about these things and why I think we should be using these tools to update data models. And if we no longer have data models, because that's not being funded, we need to go back to doing that. Because whether you call it a data model or a metadata model, that's where we need to keep track of this stuff at the column and table level, or whatever those equivalents are in other data sources. We have to get inside the files to understand this. So that's me. That's how to get a hold of me. I'd love to friend you or follow you or link in with you, but if you let me know that we met here, I can process that faster. Oh, look at that. Just 1 minute over. And if you'd like to talk to me about data nonce, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And